The twin suns burned high above the city of glass and steel. Their light fell upon the grand arena, a pit of crimson sand and shattered pride. It was here the Empire celebrated strength, cruelty, and control. Thousands of alien voices roared in unison, cheering for blood, and today the blood would belong to a human. Kale stood at the center of the arena, chains biting into his wrists. He had no armor, no weapon, nothing but the breath in his chest and the defiance in his eyes. Around him stood 3 alien warriors, each twice his size, covered in metal scales and carrying blades that gleamed under the suns. The crowd jeered, calling him a beast, a primitive, a fragile creature from a forgotten world. But Kale said nothing, his silence louder than their hatred. High above, seated in the royal balcony, was Princess Lyraya of the Varn Dominion. Her eyes, silver like liquid mercury, studied the human with curiosity and unease. She had seen hundreds of fights before, thousands of executions, but something about this one felt different. There was no fear in him, no trembling, no begging for mercy. He simply waited, calm as a storm before it breaks. The announcer's voice echoed across the arena. "Behold the last of the Terran slaves. Watch him fall before the might of Varn steel." The crowd howled with delight, their voices shaking the sky. Lyraya leaned forward, her golden crown catching the light. She did not understand why her chest felt tight, why her fingers gripped the edge of her throne so hard. The first warrior charged, swinging a blade as long as Kale's body. The sound of metal slicing through the air split the silence. Kale moved like lightning, sidestepping the blow. His fist slammed into the alien's throat, and the creature fell gasping. The audience went still, the air thick with disbelief. The second alien came roaring forward. Kale ducked under a strike, grabbed the warrior's arm, and twisted until bones snapped. He struck again, and once, twice, until the creature collapsed in the sand. Gasps rippled through the stands. The announcer stammered, unable to find words. Lyraya rose from her seat, her eyes wide, her heart racing faster than she could understand. The final warrior circled Kale, hissing in rage. "You dare defy the Varn?" He spat. Kale's voice came low and steady. "I fight for no master," he said. Then he lunged forward, bare fists against metal. Every strike echoed like thunder, every move a song of survival. The alien swung wildly, but Kale didn't falter. He ducked, kicked, struck until his enemy fell face first into the sand. Unmoving, silence swept the arena. Even the winds seemed to hold their breath. Lyraya stood frozen, watching the human covered in dust and blood. His chest heaving, he looked up, and not at the crowd, not at the guards, but at her. And in that moment their eyes met. It was not a look of gratitude or fear. It was the gaze of a being who refused to be broken. For the first time in her life, Lyraya felt something she could not name. It was not pity nor admiration, but a fierce pull deep within her soul. The human's defiance burned brighter than any flame she had ever seen. She felt her lips part, and before she could stop herself, she whispered, "I wish he was mine." The words vanished into the wind, lost beneath the roaring crowd that finally found its voice again. "Kill him!" they screamed. "End him now!" Guards moved forward, their weapons raised. Kale did not move. He simply stood tall, his chains glinting in the sun. Lyraya's heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to stop them, but her throat refused. The Emperor's voice boomed from the balcony beside her. "A fine show, daughter," he said coldly, "but end it. Before your people lose faith." Lyraya turned toward her father, her face pale. "But father," she began, her voice trembling. "He fought with honor, with strength." "With silence," the Emperor commanded. "He is a slave, not a soldier." Her hands clenched. Below, the guards advanced. But Kale met their gaze without fear. He raised his chin, the faintest of smiles touching his bruised lips. "Come and take me then," he said quietly. The guards hesitated, and even they could feel it, the strange power in his voice, the power of someone who had nothing left to lose as they dragged him away. Lyraya's eyes followed him every step he took. Every drop of blood that fell burned into her mind. Something inside her had shifted forever. The crowd celebrated his defeat, but she knew deep down, the real victory belonged to the human. That night, long after the cheers had faded, Lyraya stood by her window, the twin moons casting silver light across the palace. She whispered again, softer this time, "I wish he was mine." And somewhere in the darkness of his cell, Kale opened his eyes as if he had heard her. A storm had begun, and neither of them could stop it. The dungeon beneath the royal palace was a place of forgotten screams. Chains hung from the walls like dead vines. The air was thick with the smell of rust, sweat and hopelessness, and in the deepest cell, far from the light of the twin moons, sat Kale, the human who refused to die. His hands were bruised, his body battered, but his eyes still burned. Each breath he took was a promise that he would not kneel. He remembered the arena, the roar of the crowd, the look in her eyes, the alien princess who had whispered something he almost didn't hear. But his heart remembered, and that memory kept him alive up above. The palace glowed with gold and crystal. Princess Lyraya walked through its empty halls with a weight she could not explain. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the way he fought, the way he stood against her people. There was something raw and powerful about him, something that broke through the walls she had built around her heart. Her father's words echoed in her mind, but she could not forget the human's defiance. She reached her private chamber, her reflection in the mirror showing a royal figure in silver armor. But behind the crown she saw a woman uncertain of her own world. For the first time she questioned the Empire's laws, the bloodshed, the endless cycle of conquest. Why did I whisper those words? She murmured, touching her lips. She didn't have the answer, but her heart knew it wasn't a mistake. That night, when the palace slept, Lyraya cloaked herself in dark robes. She slipped past guards, through quiet corridors, and down into the depths her steps echoed softly, her heart racing faster with each turn. No royal had ever walked into the slave cells before. If her father found out, she would be punished, or worse, exiled. When she reached Kale's cell, the guard at the door rose to stop her. But one look from her, cold and commanding, and silenced him instantly. "Leave us," she ordered, her voice steady but her hands trembling. The guard hesitated, confused, but obeyed. Stepping out of sight inside, Kale sat against the wall, the shadows swallowing him. When she entered, he raised his head slowly, his eyes sharp even in the dim light. "You came to finish it?" he asked, his tone calm but edged. Lyraya hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I came to understand." Kale tilted his head, confused. "Understand what?" Lyraya took a step closer, her cloak brushing the cold stone. "Why you fought like that," she said softly. "You had no weapon, no chance, but you didn't yield." He stared at her for a moment before answering. "Because surrender means death long before the body falls." His words hit her like a blade of truth. She had seen warriors fight for glory, for power, for the Empire, but never for something as simple and pure as dignity. Lyraya lowered her eyes. "My people saw you as entertainment," she said. "But I saw something else." Kale gave a faint, humorless smile. "To them, I'm an animal," he replied. "To you, I'm a curiosity," her voice faltered. "No, not a curiosity," she said. "Something more." The silence that followed was heavy. Lyraya's heart beat so loud she was sure he could hear it. Kale looked away, unsure of what to make of this alien woman who defied her own kind to speak with him. Finally, he said quietly, "Why are you here, Princess?" "Your father would have me killed at sunrise." Her eyes softened. "Then I will make sure sunrise doesn't come for you." He looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer until only the bars separated them. "I can save you," she whispered. "But if I do, you must promise not to throw your life away again." Kale studied her face, the sincerity in her voice, the fear hiding behind her courage. He saw not a ruler, but a soul trapped by her own crown. "I don't make promises I can't keep," he said simply. Lyraya nodded slowly. "Then I will free you anyway," she said. Outside, footsteps echoed and the guard returning. She turned to leave, her heart pounding. Before she stepped out, Kale's voice stopped her. "Why?" he asked again. Lyraya turned back, her silver eyes shimmering in the faint torchlight. "Because when you fought, I saw what it means to be free," she said. "And I have never felt that before." She left before he could answer. The cell door closed, but her words lingered in the air like the echo of a heartbeat. Kale sat back against the wall, his fists unclenching for the first time in days. He looked at the tiny slit of moonlight above and whispered to himself, "She's a fool, but a brave one," above in her chamber. Lyraya looked out at the city lights. The stars shimmered like distant watchers. She pressed her hand against the glass and whispered once more, "The human must not die," and though she didn't know it yet, the choice would soon change the fate of the Empire. The morning light spilled through the crystal walls of the imperial palace. The sound of distant drums echoed through the courtyards, a reminder of the emperor's will. Every corner of the city shimmered with discipline and fear. But inside Princess Lyria's chamber, silence ruled. The kind of silence that follows dangerous decisions. She hadn't slept, her mind repeating Kale's words over and over, because surrender means death long before the body falls. Those words haunted her, twisting the foundation of everything she believed in. Her people worshipped dominance, but Kale had shown her something purer, something stronger than cruelty. She saw it in his eyes, in his broken hands. In his refusal to kneel, the great bronze doors opened with a low groan. Her father, Emperor Vorath, entered, his presence like a storm. "Daughter," he said coldly, "you have been seen in the slave dungeons." The words struck like a spear, but Lyria stood straight, her voice calm. "I went there to see the human who fought in the arena," she said. Vorath's golden eyes narrowed. "And why would a princess of Varn dirty her name for a creature from a dying world?" Lyria's heart pounded, but she did not flinch. "Because, father, that creature fought with more honor than any warrior of our blood." The emperor's expression hardened. "Honor? He is a beast who killed our champions. His existence insults the empire." She met his glare. "Then perhaps the empire needs to be insulted." The chamber fell silent, the air thick with tension. In that instant, Vorath's hand shot out, striking the table beside him with such force it cracked. "You forget your place," he hissed. "I have allowed your curiosity, your compassion, but this ends now." He turned to the guards. "Bring the human to the execution platform at dusk." Lyria's breath caught, her throat tightening. "No," she said quietly. "I will not allow it." The emperor froze, his expression shifting from anger to disbelief. "You will not allow it?" he repeated, his voice dark as thunder. Lyria stepped forward, trembling but unbroken. "He fought in the arena by our law. He won by our law. He deserves freedom, not death." Her father's laughter was cold and sharp. "You speak of freedom as if it were your right to grant," he said. "You are my daughter, not my equal." The doors opened again, and the High Council entered. 7 alien nobles robed in silver and crimson. Their faces were masks of judgment. "The council has heard whispers," one of them began, "that the princess has defied her father's decree." Lyria's gaze shifted to them, her heart pounding but her will burning stronger. "Yes," she said. "I defy it." Gasps rippled through the chamber. One elder hissed, "This is treason." Vorath turned his back to her, pacing slowly. "Do you know what you're doing, Lyria?" he asked, his tone low and dangerous. "You would risk the wrath of your people for a human? Slave?" Her voice softened, but it carried across the hall. "I would risk it for truth," she said. "Because if we destroy every spark of courage that rises against us, then what are we but cowards with crowns?" The emperor's fury flashed like lightning. He raised his hand, a signal to end the human's life immediately. But before the guards could move, Lyria spoke again, her voice cutting through the storm. "I claim him," she declared. The chamber went still. Every noble turned toward her in shock. Vorath's hand froze midair. "You claim him?" he repeated, disbelief coating his words. "Yes," she said firmly. "By the right of dominion, I name the human Kale as mine." The council erupted in chaos. "The right of dominion is sacred," one elder shouted. "It cannot be used for slaves." But Lyria stood tall, her voice unwavering. "The law says nothing of species," she replied. "Only that the claimed one must have proven strength." Her father glared at her, his jaw tightening. "You twist my laws to serve your emotions," he said. "Perhaps," she replied, "but the law bends only when it fears the truth." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the emperor's voice dropped to a chilling calm. "Very well, daughter," he said. "The human is yours, but his fate will be your burden." He leaned close, his eyes burning into hers. "When he dies, his death will stain your name forever." Lyria met his gaze without flinching. "Then I will bear that stain with pride," she said. As the council dispersed, whispers followed her through the marble halls. "Foolish princess," they murmured, "to claim a beast." But she ignored them, her steps quick, her heart wild with something she had never felt before. Conviction. Down in the dungeon, Kale sat in silence. He looked up as the door opened. The same princess stepping into the shadows. She carried no crown this time, only determination. "You're free," she said quietly, unlocking his chains. Kyle stared at her, disbelief flashing in his eyes. "Why?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Because my world has too many masters and not enough men like you." He stood slowly, rubbing his wrists where the chains had cut his skin. "What happens now?" he asked. She turned toward the light of the hallway, her silver eyes glowing. "Now," she said, "we see if the Empire still fears its own laws." The dawn came quietly over the domed city of Varn. Its golden towers glittered like blades of light, hiding the unrest stirring beneath. In the heart of the royal fortress, a hidden courtyard came alive with the sound of movement, the clang of metal, the breath of struggle, and the steady rhythm of fists striking air. Kale stood barefoot on the polished stone, the wind brushing across his bruised skin. Chains no longer bound his wrists, but invisible eyes still watched him. The courtyard belonged to Princess Lyraya, a private place known only to her guards and trusted aides. It was where she trained her soldier, and now, where she had brought a human to learn, Lyraya stood a few paces away, dressed not in royal silk, but in a simple training suit of black fabric. Her hair tied back, her expression cold, but her eyes betrayed something softer. She watched Kyle move, each motion sharp, controlled, born from pain and instinct rather than formal discipline. His style was raw, a reflection of humanity's desperate will to survive. Every punch carried anger, every breath carried purpose. It fascinated her more than she dared to admit. "You fight like a storm," she said finally. Her voice calm but curious. Kale didn't stop moving, his eyes focused on an invisible enemy. "A storm doesn't fight," he replied. "It just survives what stands in its way." Her lips curved slightly. "Then teach me." He froze, lowering his hands. "Teach you?" he repeated, uncertain. "Yes," she said, stepping closer. "Teach me how humans fight and how you think, how you move." Kale hesitated, unsure if this was another test, another game played by the powerful, but there was something honest in her tone. So he nodded slowly. "Then we start with balance," he said, gesturing to her stance. "Your feet are wrong. You stand like a ruler, not a fighter." Lyraya frowned, shifting her weight. "And how does a fighter stand?" Kale moved behind her, guiding her feet gently, like someone who might fall but refuses to stay down. She felt a strange warmth rise in her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not as a princess, but as an equal. They trained for hours beneath the rising suns, their movements slow, deliberate, each lesson a conversation without words. Kale showed her how to strike, how to block, how to move with instinct rather than logic, and Lyraya, for the first time, began to understand the rhythm of humanity's defiance. When the session ended, Lyraya was breathless, her hands trembling slightly. Kale handed her a small cloth to wipe her face. "You learn fast," he said. She smiled faintly. "I've never been allowed to fail." He looked at her, seeing something fragile beneath her royal armor. "Then maybe it's time you learned how to," he said softly. Her laughter echoed across the courtyard, quiet but real, a sound Kale realized he hadn't heard from anyone in this world before. But beyond the walls, eyes watched through hidden screens. Commander Vorsk, the Emperor's loyal enforcer, observed every move. His sharp tusks gleamed as he smirked. "So the rumors are true," he muttered. "The princess trains with her pet." He turned to his aide. "Inform the Emperor." It seems the infection of compassion runs deep. As days turned into weeks, Kyle and Lyraya trained in secret, each session pushing her harder. Not just in body, but in spirit. She learned to fight without fear, to move like a creature who valued freedom more than victory. Sometimes Kale spoke of Earth, the blue oceans, the endless sky, the laughter of children. Lyraya listened in silence, her heart aching with a strange envy. "You speak of your world as if it were alive," she said one evening. Kale looked toward the horizon. "It was," he whispered, "until they took it." She wanted to ask more, but the pain in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she said softly, "Then maybe, together, we can make something alive again." Kale looked at her, the faintest flicker of a smile on his lips. "Careful, princess," he said. "Hope can be dangerous, so can truth," she replied, her voice steady, and for the first time, he didn't disagree. One night after training, they sat in silence beneath the twin moons. Lyraya unfastened the silver ring from her finger, a symbol of royal duty, and placed it on the ground. "This ring means control," she said quietly. But I no longer want to control anything. Kyle looked at it, then back at her. Then what do you want? He asked. Her gaze lifted to his, shimmering in the moonlight. To understand what it means to be free, she said. He stared at her for a long moment before answering. Freedom isn't given, he said. It's taken, sometimes at a cost. She nodded slowly. Then teach me how to take it. Their eyes held, and something unspoken passed between them, a fragile alliance forged in defiance. But far below, in the Emperor's war chamber, the council had gathered. Screens displayed images of their secret training. Of the human and the princess moving in unison, the Emperor's eyes glowed with fury. My daughter has forgotten her blood, he said coldly. Then perhaps it's time she remembers. The council bowed in agreement. By dawn, soldiers were already being moved into position. And in the quiet courtyard, unaware of the storm about to break, Lyria and Kale stood together, she with her heart unguarded, he with his freedom still caged. But both ready for the battle neither yet knew was coming. The rebellion's spark, 800 words. The palace lights glittered like stars trapped in crystal. But beneath their beauty, something dangerous was beginning to move. Whispers carried through the halls like restless ghosts. Whispers of a princess who defied her father, and a human who fought like no other. In the slave barracks, the story spread faster than flame. They say the human fights beside her now. One worker murmured. They say he made the princess bleed in training and she laughed, said another. Each rumor twisted, but every word carried the same truth, hope. And for a people who had known only chains, that was enough to start a fire. Kel didn't seek to lead anyone, but the moment he was seen walking freely beside Lyria, eyes began to follow. The slaves who once looked down now met his gaze. The guards who once mocked him now flinched when he passed. Power was shifting slowly, quietly, like a tide beneath the surface one evening. Kale found himself back in the arena, not as a prisoner but as a teacher. Lyria had allowed him to train the palace guards, a move that unsettled the entire court, but she had insisted, saying the Empire needed to understand human resilience. As Kale demonstrated hand-to-hand combat, his voice steady and controlled, he noticed the growing crowd and servants, soldiers, slaves, and all watching in silence. And among them, for the first time, he saw something he thought lost forever. Respect. Lyria stood at the edge, her eyes proud but cautious. She knew what they were doing was dangerous. Every lesson he gave was more than just training. It was a seed of rebellion, and yet she couldn't stop it. For every time Kale spoke, she saw her people's arrogance crumble. Every time he fought, she saw what it truly meant to be strong. After the session ended, she approached him. You're changing them, she said softly. Kale turned to her, sweat glistening on his skin. They're changing themselves, he replied. I'm just reminding them what it feels like to stand. She smiled faintly. You make it sound so simple. It is, he said, until someone tries to stop you. That night, the sound of drums echoed through the outer walls. Kale awoke to shouting, alarms blazing across the sky. He rushed to the balcony and his heart tightened. Columns of smoke rose from the lower city. The Emperor's soldiers were sweeping through the slums, burning, capturing, silencing those who had spoken too loudly of hope. Lyria entered moments later, her robe half-tied, fear flashing in her eyes. They've discovered the whispers, she said. My father is purging anyone connected to you. Kale clenched his fists. He's killing his own people to keep control. She turned toward him, her voice breaking. This is my fault, Kale. I brought you into their sight. He stepped closer, his voice steady. No, he said. You gave them something to believe in. Outside, thunder rolled from the energy cannons. The city that once looked like a jewel now glowed like a wound. Lyria watched helplessly as the chaos spread. I can't stop him, she whispered. He's too powerful. Kale looked at her, not as a ruler, but as a woman trapped by the weight of her blood. Then we don't stop him, he said. We outlive him. She turned to him confused. What do you mean? Kale walked to the table, pulling a piece of parchment. He began sketching lines, hidden tunnels beneath the palace, guard routes, slave quarters. If we can free the workers and the captives, if we can reach the docks, her eyes widened. You're planning to escape? He shook his head. Not escape, Lyria, he said. A beginning. For a long moment she said nothing, then she whispered, You're talking about rebellion. Kale met her gaze, his voice low and certain. Freedom always starts as rebellion. Outside, lightning flashed, revealing the shadow of Commander Vorsk watching from a nearby tower. He smiled darkly. So it's true, he whispered to his soldiers. The princess plans treason with her human. He turned to his aide. We'll let them move first, and when they do, we'll crush them both in front of the Emperor. Back in the chamber, Lyraya placed her hand over Kale's sketch. If we do this, she said softly, there's no going back. He looked up at her, his voice steady. There was never a way back. She studied him. The man who once stood in chains, now standing like a leader. Her pulse quickened, her breath shallow. Then I'll stand with you, she said. That night, under the cover of storm clouds, Kale moved through the underground passages. Every step he took was echoed by hundreds more, slaves, workers, forgotten souls, all following the human who fought with his hands and his heart. At the palace window above, Lyraya watched the darkness shifting below. Her father's banners still hung across the towers, but she knew before the next dawn they would mean nothing. And as the first spark of rebellion lit the night sky, Kyle whispered to himself, for Earth, and for those who still believe, while far above Lyraya whispered the same words, her voice trembling, for him and for freedom. The twin suns rose red that morning, painting the sky with the color of blood. The city of Varn trembled with unrest, smoke rising from the outskirts where rebellion had ignited in the dark. The Emperor's banners flapped violently in the hot wind, their golden sigils scorched by fire and fury. Trumpets echoed across the capital, summoning every citizen to the grand arena, the same place where one man had once stood alone against monsters. Kale stood there again now, but not as a slave this time, as a symbol. His wrists were bound once more, his chest bruised and bloodied, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. Around him, soldiers lined the walls, and thousands of citizens filled the stands above them. The Emperor's throne loomed, carved from obsidian and lined with gold, and beside him stood Lyraya, pale, silent, her hands clenched behind her back. The Emperor rose, his voice booming through the amplifiers. My people, he declared, you see before you the creature who corrupted our blood, who defied our laws, who turned my own daughter against me. The crowd roared in anger and fear. Lyraya flinched at the sound, her heart torn between the people she had been born to lead and the man she had chosen to protect. Kale lifted his head, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. He didn't see hatred, he saw fear, the kind of fear born from lifetimes of obedience. He had seen that same fear on his own world before it burned. And now, standing on alien soil, he swore to break it once more. The Emperor's hand rose and silence fell. Let the human prove his worth once again, he said, his tone dripping with cruel amusement. Let him fight, not for his freedom, but for his life. The gates on the far side of the arena creaked open. A monstrous shape emerged, towering, armored, its skin glistening with scales of silver and blue. It was the Empire's champion, a beast bred for one purpose, destruction. Kale's chains fell away, clattering to the sand. He flexed his hand slowly, his muscles aching, his heart steady. From the royal balcony, Lyraya's voice trembled. Father, this is not justice. The Emperor ignored her, his golden eyes fixed on Kale. Show them what happens to those who defy the Varn dominion, he commanded. The beast roared, charging forward, its claws slicing through the air. Kale moved just in time, diving to the side, the sand exploding beneath his feet. The crowd gasped, their cheers turning to anxious murmurs. He rolled, dodging another strike, then another, his movements sharp and deliberate. He had no weapon, but he had what no machine or monster could possess, instinct. The beast lunged again, but this time Kale met it head on. He grabbed its arm, twisting it with all his strength, using its momentum to send it crashing to the ground. The arena trembled as the creature roared in pain. Kyle leapt onto its back, striking its armored neck with his fists until the metal cracked. Each blow echoed like thunder, shaking the walls of the Empire's pride. Lyraya's breath caught, her eyes wide around her. Even the nobles fell silent, watching. Captivated, Kale fought like a force of nature, bleeding, breaking, but refusing to stop. The creature threw him off, slamming him into the sand, but Kale rose again, blood dripping from his mouth. He wiped it away and whispered to himself, humans don't fall, we rise. The crowd began to change, their anger fading into awe. A low murmur rippled through them. Then a chant, faint at first. Human, human, human. The Emperor's face darkened, fury boiling beneath his calm mask. "Enough!" he shouted, but no one listened. Kale turned toward the beast one last time. He waited for it to charge, then stepped forward, dodging left, and struck the side of its neck with a final, crushing blow. The creature fell, its roar fading into silence. The arena shook as it collapsed. Lifeless, Kale stood panting, his body broken but his will unbroken. He turned toward the Emperor's balcony and raised his head. "This is what you fear," he said, his voice echoing through the amplifiers. "A human without chains." The crowd erupted, some in cheers, others in horror. Lyrea stepped forward, her heart racing. Her father's guards moved to seize her, but she raised her hand. "No more blood," she said, her voice strong. The Emperor sneered. "You dare defy me here?" Lyrea looked at him, and for the first time, she saw not a ruler, but a man trapped by his own power. "I don't defy you, father," she said softly. "I free myself from you." With a swift motion, she drew the ceremonial blade from her waist and cut through the chain that bound the royal banner behind them. The symbol of the Varn Empire fell to the sand. Gasps filled the air. Kale's eyes met hers, and for the first time since his capture, he smiled. The Emperor's rage erupted. "Traitor!" he roared. "Guards, kill them both!" Blasters fired. The arena filled with smoke and screams. But as chaos spread, something else began to rise. The slaves from the lower tiers. The citizens, the forgotten. They surged forward, their chains breaking, their voices uniting. "Freedom!" They cried, "Freedom for all!" Lyrea leapt from the balcony into the arena below. Landing beside Kale, he caught her arm, steadying her. "You shouldn't have come," he said through heavy breaths. She looked at him, her eyes fierce. "You fought alone once," she said. "You won't fight alone again." And as the two of them stood side by side amid fire and chaos, the crowd's roar became something new, not fear, not hate, but awakening. For the first time in the history of the Empire, the people saw that their gods could bleed. Smoke drifted over the capital like a dying ghost. The twin suns hung dim behind clouds of ash. What had once been a city of perfect symmetry and pride now burned with chaos and hope. The rebellion had begun, and there was no turning back. Kale and Lyrea stood at the heart of the storm. The arena that once chained him had become their battlefield. Around them, freed slaves and defected soldiers fought side by side. Every shout, every strike was a declaration that fear no longer ruled. Kale's fists were torn and bleeding, but he didn't stop. He fought with the strength of every broken world, every silenced voice at his side. Lyrea wielded her blade with precision, her royal insignia ripped from her armor. Her father's soldiers saw her and hesitated. Some bowed, others turned away, for in her eyes burned the light of something greater than authority. Across the chaos, the Emperor stood on the high balcony, his robe tattered by wind, his eyes glowing with fury and disbelief. "Lyrea!" he roared, his voice echoing like thunder. "You destroy everything I built." She raised her sword, her voice strong and steady. "No, father, I'm saving what's left of it." He turned to his guards. "Kill them all. Leave nothing breathing." But the soldiers faltered, uncertain. Many had seen Kale fight. Many had seen their princess bleed beside him. The spell of fear was broken, and hesitation was the Empire's first wound. Kale glanced at Lyrea, his breath ragged. "They won't stop until one of us falls," he said. She nodded, her face streaked with soot. "Then we make sure it's not us." They fought their way up the steps, each strike echoing the rhythm of defiance. By the time they reached the Emperor's dais, dozens lay fallen behind them. Vorath stood waiting, his sword drawn, a weapon forged in conquest. "You think you've won?" He spat. "You think a human can change the course of stars?" Kale stared back, his voice cold. "Not a human. Humanity." Their blades clashed, metal ringing across the arena. The Emperor moved with power and precision. But Kale fought with something deeper. Purpose. Every blow the Emperor landed drew blood, but every hit Kale returned drew doubt. And when doubt took root in a tyrant's heart, power began to crumble. At last Vorath swung too wide. Kale seized the moment, driving his knee into the Emperor's chest and knocking him to the ground. The old ruler gasped, fury replaced by disbelief. "You worthless creature," he hissed. Kyle stood over him, panting, his fists trembling. "I was a slave to your empire," he said. "But you've always been a slave to your fear." He turned away, refusing to strike the final blow. But Lyrea stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears. "You taught me that mercy is weakness," she whispered. You were wrong." Then she dropped her sword beside him, letting it fall into the dust. "Your reign ends not by death, father," she said, "but by choice." Voreth stared up at her. Defeated all around, the sound of battle faded. The soldiers laid down their weapons, the slaves dropped their chains, and the city, for the first time in centuries, fell silent. Kale looked around, breathing heavily. The arena was no longer a prison. It was a cradle of rebirth. Lyria stepped beside him, her face streaked with tears and ash. He looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. "It's over." She shook her head softly. "No," she said. "It's beginning." As the first rays of morning broke through the smoke, they walked together through the ruins, the people bowing as they passed, not to a princess or a warrior, but to hope itself. Kyle stopped before the shattered throne, gazing up at the rising suns. He thought of Earth, of the faces he'd lost, of the voices that once called him brother. And in that silence he found peace. Lyria turned toward him, her expression gentle. "When I first saw you," she said quietly, "I saw a beast fighting to survive." Kale smiled faintly. "And now?" She stepped closer, her hand resting over his heart. "Now I see a man who reminded the galaxy what it means to be alive." He looked into her eyes, silver and bright against the red sky. And in that moment, the memory of her whisper from the first arena came rushing back. "I wish he was mine," she had said. But now she didn't whisper it. She said it clearly for all the stars to hear. "I wish he was mine." Kale smiled. Tired, scarred but free. "You already had me," he said softly. And as the wind carried their words into the dawn, the banners of the old empire fell for the last time. In their place, a new flag rose, woven from ashes and courage, the mark of a world reborn by human hands. And far across the galaxy, in the ruins of forgotten colonies, old transmitters flickered to life, carrying a single message into the void: "We are free. Humanity lives."